His website's thehouroftheTime.com. And Mr. Shamley, sorry about that break interrupting you. You were at the point where you were talking about UPS drivers, so I'll just let you continue from where you were at, sir.
Sure. And what had promulgated this whole so-called investigation, Farron, was a local doctor, Dr. Scott Hamlin, who's a lying piece of crap, always has been. He and his family supposedly went up there for a ice cream treat and park and watch the sunset several months earlier. On private property, of course, they were parked. But Bill ran them off from the house and the property up there. Now, they claimed that Bill followed them to their house and he shoved it, and this little wormy lying doctor shoved his finger and pushed Bill back in the driveway, which would have never happened. Bill would have stomped on him had he pushed him. And that Bill had a gun and all this stuff, right? And the wife and children ran in the house for fear of their lives, but because he parked right in their driveway, they had a full description of the gun and the vehicle and the license plate. Well, he goes down and files a local police report. And the investigators and the police force here in Eager and the chief, Scott Garms, couldn't find any evidence. They ran the plate that they just got to look point blank from the front window to the bumper. They claimed they had all the perfect view. It was not his plate. They gave the wrong description of his truck. He only owned one truck. He only drove one truck. It's the only thing he did drive. The car, the new tires I mentioned earlier that occurred that day, running in and out, the preface, that it was just a normal day to start with, was a car he was getting up and running. So that was so much baloney, and they knew Bill and how Bill was. They really didn't buy that the little doctor pushed him around and did all this either, and that there wasn't just a right-out fist fight and you're done type thing in the driveway. So it was dropped. Well, this little worm, he was upset. He didn't get his way. He thinks he's special because of the family he happens to belong to. And he ran and took it to the county and state because the city wouldn't do anything. So they proceeded to do an investigation, hence all the intelligence gathering and blah, 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 the photos and scans I told you about, the satellite images, using the UPS as spies. His name was Norm, by the way, the driver. May he rot in hell. And several other people around Bill, we found out. Now, there was another gentleman, Glenn, who we call Glenn Judas Jacobs, had come around forever, hung out and leave. He just lived off the hill from Bill. He went down and filed a report that me and Bill had killed Annie, Pooh, and Allison, the family, and buried them under the house. We had the place landmined and booby-trapped, and we had AK-47s by the front door. See, the typical BS reports that time and time again are proven to be lies. You see the trend going here, the AK-47s, blah, blah, blah. So all the gears and paperwork looks good to justify what they're going to do, they think. So that night, they get in there, and they have that emergency quick tactical team meeting, say we're going to do it tonight. The 5th, 6th, like I say, because it was so late, people get that little time difference confused. They decided to use a plain-marked Chevy pickup, the tactical teams did, like anybody might drive around this. We're in the mountain country, 7,500 feet, in the forest, elk, all that. Everybody owns a truck. Drove up and down to the end of the cul-de-sac from Bill, a dirt cul-de-sac. He lived on top of a hill. He was the only home on there. And they had, in fact, 2 people in the cab, one laying in the floorboards. It's all in the reports. And then in the back of the truck, they had more agents laying underneath the tarp. So what they did was went down there and acted maybe like rowdy teenagers, drinking and playing stereos and whatnot. Something, high school children do. And Bill drove down there to run them off. Well, while he drove down there, then agents on foot were coming up the hill from the opposite end to surround him around the house. At that time, which is really ironic, is they even in their briefing to the chief, the lieutenant, and the sergeant locally here at about 1 in the morning when they finally told them that they had a dead resident and that they had done an operation in their town without notifying them ahead of time, said that Bill even told them, I'm going to go call the police. You're trespassing. So even though they're law enforcement, even though the person says he's going to go call the police and involve the law, he's still treated like a criminal or a terrorist and ambushed. So he turns the truck around to head back to the home to make that phone call to involve the law. See how bizarre this is? And that's when a guy came out of the bushes and jumped on Bill's running board and tried to reach in. You know how they try to throw your shifter into park? And Bill knocked him off just with his arm, didn't run over him or nothing. Pulled up kind of on a berm trying to get back to his home, ripped out the whole exhaust system from underneath the Chevy step side. He drove, got in front of the house, got out. There's people swarming him from every direction, armed. Nobody said they're sheriffs or a tactical team or that they represent the law, and the shooting started. Now, Bill was running for the front door to get in. He had already indicated he was involving the law, so what kind of criminal is he? These people need to think about this.
Exactly.
The shooting began. Now, they claim he swung his right hand back and shot over his shoulder. I had to survey everything, his dead body, the puddles of blood, where people were laying. Officer Marinas was laying forward and at an angle to him, and Bill supposedly shot him. Now, he didn't die or nothing, but the reason that doesn't jive is because we have a bullet hole through the car that was parked there. And the angle doesn't match him pointing over behind him while he's running, randomly shooting. We're talking about a 60-degree difference, so I guess he had one of those magic bullets. And, but who Marinas did line up with was Deputy Goldsmith. Now, Deputy Goldsmith is who shot Bill multiple times. Those two were an exact line. Bill, we had an official forensics specialist on the air live, unrehearsed, so nothing would be pre-done. Analyze the autopsy reports, which we got from the Tucson lab of Arizona that did the autopsy. Whenever there's a shooting like this, there's always an autopsy automatically done. They indicated there was gross amounts of stippling. Now, stippling only occurs when you fire a gun 6 inches or less distance because it's the unused powder that's still burning that comes out of the end of the barrel behind the projectile and hits the skin and leaves little burn marks. He had those marks on his temple and artery areas by his shoulders and head after he had sustained wounds that would have made him completely inoperable. He could not have fought back. He would have basically been laying there gurgling in blood at the most. And someone walked up that close a range and shot him more times. So close that it left burn marks. Stippling, it's called. The forensics expert also indicated that based on the angles and the order of fire and the wounds, because, you know, every wound can be sequenced, even in a dead body, due to the damage and the age of the blood and the tissue and the trauma. You can even get an order that the rounds hit the body. There were shots from above, which indicates someone was even up on his front porch shooting downward at him, because the angle would have been impossible to acquire. That occurred less than, 8 feet from the front door. In fact, the little teeny bit of concrete walking up the stoop was right next to his head. That's how close he was, where he laid. And all the blood was and whatnot. They finally, after all this is done, and let me tell you again how pre-planned it was. They had, in advance, already notified the local ambulance service not to run sirens or lights through town if they got a call that evening because they didn't want to disrupt the community.
Wow.
Okay,
Unreal,
so
Mr. Shamley. It's just...
all this occurred. Now, Bill, made the